the Baen Free Radio Hour.
Hello and welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour. Today, Griffin Barber interviews A.C. Haskins on his latest novel in the Soldier of the Arcanum series, Blood and Fate. After that, we jump into part 23 of the serialization of Mark Van Name's John and Lobo novel, One Jump Ahead. Hi there, I'm Griffin Barber, your host for today's edition of the Baen Free Radio Hour. Hello and welcome, A.C. Haskins.
Hi.
Author of the Soldier of the Arcanum series, of which we are here to talk about the second installment, Blood and Fate. I'm really excited to get to talking about this. But first, can you tell us a little bit about yourself here?
Military veteran turned economist and business executive and occasional writer. Yeah.
Well, okay. So hardest question first. What is the coolest aspect of Blood and Fate for you?
So I was very insistent that we include the word fate in the title. There was some back and forth about what we were actually going to call the book. Because that's a major theme of it. Like, what is the nature of fate and how we make our own, how we craft our own story? Are we bound, what limits us and where our free will can take us and all that kind of stuff. So that was a really fun thing for me to be able to explore in a action-packed, urban fantasy featuring an alcoholic sorcerer who shoots people in the face. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So I take it you didn't stumble on that. That was something you wanted to explore kind of going into it?
That popped up fairly early in my outlining plot design, structuring of the book process, as something that was one of the main themes that I wanted to interweave throughout I'd say there were three things that I tried to interweave throughout it, and that was one of the main ones that I wanted to bring out in there.
And is that more based on the Norns or Greek or Roman mythology?
It's a mix. It's really, I was just reading a lot of philosophy. I wanted to play into it. But yeah, so in this book, it's centered around the Norns and Urdabrunner, the Well of Fate from Norse mythology, which is one of the three wells or springs at the roots of the world tree Yggdrasil.
Right.
And that's the cover of the book depicts Quinn peering into the Well of Fate with one of the Norns in the background, having guided him there. And that's what you see the roots and all that at the background. Cool. That's Yggdrasil.
Very sweet. All right. So you also have, as you mentioned already, you have some very realistic gunplay in the series, Soldier of the Arcanum. They really sing in relation to the urban fantasy aspects going on. So it's like this juxtaposition of, well, I could do that with sorcery, but sometimes Smith and Wesson is the way to go.
Yeah.
So tell us, if you would, a little bit about how that came to pass.
I've been a firearms enthusiast for pretty much my entire adult life. Since I was in the Army and enjoyed shooting, and then just kind of got into it as a side hobby. Got into competitive handgun shooting. For a while I was a concealed carry instructor out in Minnesota, and so it's something that I enjoy, and most authors do not portray well and accurately. And as someone who actually trained and went to firearms courses on a regular basis and shot several thousand rounds a year minimum and so forth, I wanted to depict it well. So I made a character who knew what he was doing, and let me play around with a lot of different guns and different contexts for using them. I think Quinn's, and I tried to ground it in reality. Like, Quinn explains how he got into firearms, why he uses the guns he uses,
Quinn
how
trains.
how he actually trains so that he's
Quinn
actually
trains. That's the key
yeah,
right
he
there.
actually trains. And in the first book, he told that he trains. So in this book, I early on, I think it's chapter 2, I actually put a scene of him at a training course,
Right.
practicing one-handed draws from concealment to first shot. Yeah, and that was a lot of fun to describe because I actually put him at a course that I have taken with instructors that I know,
Right.
and so I could describe it realistically from my own experience and just kind of put Quinn in place. And I'm nowhere near as good a shot as Quinn is in the books, but I know what it takes to be that good.
Right. Well, and that's one of the things that any author in any genre covering any kind of subject matter, if you show a little bit of a training montage or, a realistic that they spend time being this good, because it's not about getting there and then you're done. It's a
Yeah.
perishable skill set, right? In any of the things, sorcery included, whatever, you get there, you don't just stay there. If you quit playing Call of Duty for a while, you're going to suck at it when you come back to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the fun things that I had in this book was my friends John and Sarah, who own Filster holsters. Several years ago, they came out with what's called the Filster Enigma, which is this concealment rig that essentially revolutionized the way you can carry by divorcing the holster from your clothing. It's its own self-contained rig. And I really wanted to be the first author to feature it heavily in a book. I don't know if I'm the first one to actually get it in there. There's two others who might have beat me to it, but it's definitely like I gave Quinn an enigma and it makes sense in the story why he has it and the advantage that it gives him in at least a couple scenes. So that was fun for me to just kind of plug one of my friend's products in there. I got no promotional consideration, but
But also
John's,
you've
John's
used,
John's given me some goodies in the past, so fair's fair.
right? And that you've used, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. At training courses. Yeah. And I carry in an Enigma holster on a regular basis.
cool. So, which character in Blood and Fate surprised you?
So Karis would be the one who, so she is, we'll come back to her, I'm sure, later in the interview, but she is a wild fae that Quinn meets as he's traveling through the other world. And she was originally intended to just be a one-off, appear in that one scene, and then, but I just kind of fell in love with her as a character and the potential that she had for Quinn's character development and interaction with her. So I had to go back and figure out, okay, I honestly it delayed the book by at least a couple months of me figuring out how I wanted to fit her into the
Greater
story in a
context
way
of the
that made
story,
sense and didn't feel like she was just pasted on.
right? So, what is she, or how did she kind of come to be? You say that
So
she,
she's a Morgan, which is a Welsh water spirit. Similar to like a Rusalka in Russian mythology, where like they're beautiful women who are found at the water's edge, and if you fall for their wiles, they'll drown you and probably eat you. And and uh and I just I've always that's something that was not really well explored in the first book. There was a Rusalka character, but um she was a one-off. In this one, I originally introduced her just as a demonstration of the other world is dangerous. There are hazards that you just have to be aware of. And
very
even if you
dangerous,
know what you're doing and you're very skilled, there's a chance that you could die if you're not very careful. And Quinn comes close to dying
or
in
stay
that
forever.
scene, until he gets very lucky and manages to break her glamour. Um, and through no planning on his own. Like I said, he got lucky on it. And it was just a here there be monsters type of character.
Yeah,
But their interaction just made me smile so much. So I was like, I have to have more of Karis. I gotta put her in the story as like an actual character.
cool. So that's interesting. Also, that kind of leads into our next segue is that I'm assuming that you have some affection for Philadelphia. Because Blood and Fate starts in and moves through Philadelphia. It's especially in the series, it is almost its own character with regard to the civil servants from it and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So why the city of brotherly love?
Um, So when I was originally writing the story, Blood and Whispers, way back before it ever became like, oh, this is something I could actually try and get published. I set it in New York just because I went to college at West Point and spent a lot of time in New York, so I was very familiar with it. But my best friend Phil pointed out that so many urban fantasy series are in New York. Like you gotta find somewhere new. And like he wrote one, oh, he wrote one book. He never finished the series before he got sidetracked, but he wrote one in Minneapolis. I was like, well, where am I familiar enough that I could set it and have it be fun and really introduce a lot of these elements of the city that a lot of people wouldn't know unless you're from there or have spent a lot of time there.
Right.
And the answer was Philly because so I was an Army brat. I grew up all over the place. And then I joined the Army, started 2 days after I turned 18. So I don't really have a hometown, but my grandparents are from Philly. Well, they're not from there originally, but they've lived there my entire life.
Right.
They'd settled there by the time I was born. So I spent basically every summer, half of my Christmases, and then just a lot of random trips in the Philly area. So I was very familiar with it. And I was like, thinking about it, I couldn't think of a whole lot of books that were set there, at least in the speculative fiction genre. And I was like, this is something unique that I could bring out some interesting places. Like in the first book, the fairy market is in the Magic Gardens, which
Right.
if you don't know Philly, then you would never know about this. But it's this just really cool, unique place that only exists in Philly. And so that was just something that I could play around with. And then there's also the grittiness of the city. It's a very blue collar kind of rundown. Well, some of it, but in a lot of neighborhoods, very, very just, gritty. I think literally the mascot of the Philadelphia Flyers is named Gritty. And he's a Lovecraftian horde. I love him.
Well,
But,
and it's also a historic city, so you have
right.
these creatures that are very old living there.
Right. And yeah, so there's also, yeah, so that the tone of the city fit the tone of the character, and it felt like somewhere that Quinn would have settled.
Right.
And then at the same time, as you said, it's a very historic city. So there's a big part of Philly that's called the Welsh Tract. And it was from early on in the colonial era,
Yeah.
a lot of Welsh settlers came over and created a bunch of towns. So that's why you have like Bryn Mawr as one of the major suburbs of Philadelphia, which is where my grandparents lived. And it today it's no more Welsh than anywhere else in the country, but all these place names.
Right.
And so that allowed me to kind of play around with, okay, so there's probably a good, and there's a big heavy Irish population in the city and a big heavy German population in the city. So that let me kind of play with what types of fey creatures would be found in and around the city that would give it kind of a unique feel versus a completely cosmopolitan place like New York or LA, or somewhere that would have a completely different vibe to it. Like Boston would be far more Irish than Welsh and German.
Right.
And so it just those were kind of the mixes that I really wanted. So it was just, some of it was just a happy coincidence of I happen to know this city now. What can I do to play with it? But I think it worked out really well with the story that I wanted to tell, the character that I wanted to tell, the mythology I wanted to weave in, all of that kind of plays.
I noticed, however, that you said it was a guy named Phil who said you needed to do Philadelphia. So
Yeah, that's true. Yes, my best friend Phil, and yeah, he didn't say Philadelphia. He said somewhere not New York.
okay. All right. We'll give you a pass on this one then.
Yeah.
So we get into this also deals with a lot of we already mentioned the love interest for Thomas Quinn. We already talked about that kind of inspiration, etc. But what character from Blood and Fate would you want to avoid like the plague? And why?
Without giving any spoilers on it, Black Annis probably. So she's
Pleasant.
one of the plots of this story is that a bunch of assassins keep showing up to try and kill Quinn, and Black Annis is, I think, the second one to show up. And She is a character from English folklore, Lancaster area, as I recall. Lancashire, Northern England. And she's like the one of the prototypes of like the modern image of the witch as like this just old hag woman, like
Halloween
evil,
witch, American
yeah, like living
Halloween.
in a cave, kidnapping children and eating them.
Right.
And yeah, like yeah, long fingered, damp, greasy hair, gray skin, hook nose, all that. And yeah, she's just the way I portray her in this, she's just a very unpleasant person. And like some of the other assassins who show up, like you could have a beer with them. It's not personal. They're there for business. She enjoys causing pain, and is there like for her. It is definitely personal.
And goes after him indirectly as well.
Yes, yes. She kidnaps one of his friends, and he has to deal with that.
So that's one of the things we wanted to get into. We'll get into that in a moment. But so, which character would you want as an ally?
There's a bunch in this one who would be great. Like if you actually depends on what I'm facing, but obviously any of the Fae would probably be good choices because they're all very powerful magical beings who could curb stomp most enemies you'd come across. But from personality wise, I'd say probably Henri Lajoie,
Yeah.
who's in the first book he was a Philly homicide detective, ended up getting severely injured. Now he's medically retired and he's working with Quinn. And he's very ride or die.
Yeah.
He's gonna help. You ask him for help, he's there.
Right.
And he's very matter of fact. He's like he doesn't put up with any bullshit. He's gonna do what needs to be done. And he's just a fun character to write. I enjoy Henri.
Well, and he also progresses in this one to learning some stuff that he did not know before, and
Yeah,
he gets a
yeah.
lot of
His
character
grandfather was
progression.
a sorcerer, and Quinn kind of read him in based on that in the first book after kind of being confronted and forced into it. And then in this one, he's kind of taken him under his wing as like his not as an apprentice, but his protege, really.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, and he also faces some challenge for having done so.
yeah, yeah, a little bit.
That's I love the way you opened the book, by the way.
That was fun. It was
Yeah,
yeah. Quinn. We opened the book with Quinn having to answer to a tribunal for some of the choices he made in the first book.
right.
So
So
it's a fun way to do kind of the story so far.
and introduce some new potential problematic characters for future
Yeah,
use.
yeah, definitely show more of the dynamics that were hinted at in the first book of Quinn's relationship with with the rest of the Arcanum.
Yeah.
So,
So Blood and Fate deals with the challenges a veteran can face when they have no support group that truly understands their specific and particular experiences. Is this rooted in personal experience or something you wanted to just explore, or yes, or both?
yes and no. I don't have PTSD. I know plenty of veterans who do and who have struggled with it, but really for me it was when I first started writing this book, I was deployed in Afghanistan. This was very early days, long before I even knew what the hell I was actually writing. It was something to do in my downtime in Afghanistan. And there was definitely a lot of cynicism and personal bitterness that kind of helped me shape the character. Um, and then yeah, also just seeing other people. So it's Quinn is not based on anyone in particular. He's definitely not based on me. One of part of what I did was I wanted to make sure I wasn't never accused of writing a Mary Sue, so I made a character that no one in their right mind would ever want to be. Quinn is miserable. Like no one would want to be Quinn. but 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 in terms of how it actually plays out, a lot of that is based on some personal experience, but also married with seeing folks struggle with it. Veterans dealing with things that they saw that they had to deal with. Yeah, no, I don't think I've ever woken up in a cold sweat from screams in my nightmares the way Quinn has. But I definitely have some memories that can be, it could have gone that way. It just I was fortunate.
Cool. So he does, Quinn, in response, he does tend to build a community over the course of the two books, certainly much more so in this book than in the first one, given that he's kind of pushing back against everybody in
Yeah.
the first one. Again, is this drawn from personal experience or watching other people do it?
No,
Or
I
is it
think it was kind of a logical progression for his character. He starts off as a loner and he's a dick. Like no one really wants to be his friend. There's a couple folks who knew him before all this went down who have kind of snuck, like Angus has known him since the 1860s, before, like when he was still an idealistic, adventurous, relatively young, only at that point 90 years old, 85 years old or whatever. and and so he kind of has watched with sadness what has happened to Quinn, but he has stuck by him as his friend. Most other folks that he interacts with who don't know his past don't really want to be around him any more than they have to. They interact with him because there's some benefit to them for it. He runs the shop and he can get the magical items or things like that.
when it's what he says he wants to, right?
Right. And he wants to be left alone. And he argues it's with his pain, but really it's his shame. He's ashamed of the things he's done. And
which we explore in this book too, with the
right, yeah,
what happened with the dragon and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and then events occur in the first book and people start to kind of see under that shell, and he doesn't so much as invite them in as they insert themselves in his life.
Right.
And like he's forced to work with Henri and Adrienne, and they kind of just start befriending him as they realize what he's going through. And Henri at least has had some very similar experiences in his own life. He's gone through a lot of trauma. So they kind of start that ball rolling, and then he's kind of forced to, by the end of the book, rely on other people, and that starts bringing him out of his shell. But even at the beginning of this book, there's a scene where Henri, Adrienne, and Henri's husband Peter invite him out to dinner, and he's like, "Nah, I'm good." He's still not, like, he'll interact with people, but he's still not a sociable person.
Yeah.
And he kind of lets Henri take over dealing with customers in the shop so that he doesn't have to, and all that kind of stuff. And it's really just a logical progression of Quinn's character development. Like you can't write this loner, frankly, asshole for multiple books without it just getting old. Like it becomes a shtick. And so like his character needs to progress. And as he starts to confront some of his own problems, his own inner demons, naturally that would lead to him kind of opening up to other people more. Well,
even if nothing else, if they're just while they're watching.
Yeah.
They're watching it happen.
Like they happen to be there while all this is happening, then naturally he's going to start interacting with them more. And then eventually, like that's how friendships are made.
Right.
And so, yeah, it just kind of, as I was exploring, one of the things I wanted to explore in the first book in particular is what this would do to someone, what living this life would actually result in. And so I just kind of wanted to continue exploring that. All right, well, he's a little out of his shell. Where does that end? Well, it ends with him actually having friends and caring about people again. And then some of them get hurt and he gets really angry about it. Yeah. And events ensue.
It becomes a lever for more story and more
exactly
figuring out what he's like. Yeah. No, speaking of the threats that kind of come to pass against his friends and loved ones, the mythic creatures figure prominently in the series, and in this book in particular, it's even more so than in the previous one. Were these myths and legends something you came to as a child or later in life?
Both.
Because I was going to say like dinosaurs or mythology. Like,
I mean,
for me, it was mythology.
also both.
For me, it was mythology. I couldn't,
Yeah, no.
dinosaurs, I couldn't give a damn.
For the longest time, I wanted to become a paleontologist, but I've always loved mythology. My mom had a copy of Bulfinch's Mythology that I read cover to cover so many times I lost count. I think I ruined the covers of that book. Like they fell off by the time I was done with it. And yeah, so I grew up loving Greek mythology, Roman mythology. I got into Norse mythology later. I didn't really know anything about Irish mythology until later in life. When I was in college, I started kind of exploring my own family's history, and which is heavily Irish and Irish, Scottish, and Welsh, um, and um, and started diving into those cultures more. And I ended up majoring in international history and writing a thesis on Irish Druids in the early Christian era. And as part of the research, like you can't read about Dark Age, Bronze Age Ireland without the mythology. Like that's a huge part of the culture. So you have to learn the folklore and the mythology. And that I essentially, when I started to write this book, I was like, I have a head full of all of this Irish folklore that is completely useless. Like, what is it? I may as well find something productive to do with it. Let's write a book. So that's, but because I also, have that background with Norse mythology and German mythology and Greco-Roman mythology, and then I wanted the book to, while Quinn is primarily focused on like Western and Northern European stuff, some Mediterranean stuff, I wanted to ensure that that's not everything in it. One of the premises of the book is that most of the pantheons of mythological gods were in fact tribes of Fae who lived on Earth, and humans worshiped them as magical beings, and then all the mythology built up around that. So while they some of them appear more prominently than others, but I made sure to include Arabic and Egyptian mythology. There's references to ancient Sumerian mythology, Chinese mythology, Hindu, Indian mythology, Japanese, all like there's African, South American, just trying to bring it all in because like it's a world and it can't just feel like a bunch of Irish and German folks and nothing else. Like there has to be,
and that informs
you have to acknowledge that all of these other cultures and tribes exist, and so
and it also kind of reflects the Philly thing, right? Because now you're going back and forth between this. So yes, maybe predominantly here in Philly that these things we're kind of dealing with, but that's because these Fae have settled here and
but Philly also has a fairly extensive Chinatown, and like there's lots of other cultures in the area that there's a fairly large African American population, so that's going to bring in a lot of the African and Caribbean mythologies, and that they would have carried from their ancestors and all that. It was fun. Plus, I brought Black Annis in because Anglo-Saxons are still a big part of American culture, and we would have had their mythology too.
Plus, why miss an opportunity to get rid of a great evil, right?
Right, exactly. I was undecided if I was actually going to kill Black Annis in the book, but the scene was fun the way it turned out.
Yeah, the way it turned out. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. We don't know. We'll not spoil it for everybody.
Yeah.
So I guess you said yes as a child. And then
as a child and later in life, depending on which mythology we're talking about. Yeah.
Right. And so what do you have a favorite? Do you have a secret sauce that gets you going?
For what?
Mythology. Like or even a god or urge or
demigod. I don't think so, honestly. I just love it all. I like the stories. Mythology is I just did a panel at LibertyCon 2 weeks ago. About mythology, and one of the things that I was thinking about as I was trying to answer some of the questions in that is we tend to think in modern society we encounter mythology as stories written down in a book, and it's a collection of clear defined stories, and that is the myth.
Not the case. Yeah.
No, the stories come out of the mythology. The stories are personification of the mythology, but the mythology is just people sitting around a fire trying to explain the universe to each other. why is there lightning? Why are there floods? Where do the tides come from? What, all that kind of stuff. And it's
Who did I piss off to get this have
right.
this
It is
happen?
before
Yeah.
we invented this, before we discovered the scientific method or invented the scientific method, or however you want to, however you feel about that. Mythology was how we explained the universe, and stories came out of that. But that isn't mythology. And I really enjoy diving into mythology as culture,
Right.
mythology
Living,
as
breathing
history,
culture.
really.
Yeah, living, breathing,
It's really
spoken
hard
history.
to understand most pre-literate, definitely, and pre-industrial societies, probably, without understanding their mythology, because that shapes their society, that shapes their culture, that shapes their language, that shapes it. I mean, we still have it through all of our language,
Oh yeah.
our days of the week and our month names, and the fact that we call it a bear instead of an arctos, and yeah, like all of that is comes from folklore and mythology, and however you want to phrase that. But all of that gets me going. I thoroughly enjoy it.
Yeah, and a warrior ethos as opposed to what,
Yeah.
defining roles in society, what a
Yeah,
king
one of
is.
the big things that shaped World War One was this French idea of the cult of the bayonet. Like, yeah, it might be easier to kill someone with a bullet, but real men use cold steel, and so like that, and that shaped the way that they fought and the way that they approached battle, and like World War One would not have worked out the way it had if it weren't for that weird little quirk of modern mythology in the French army. Yeah.
So I'm still trying to figure out if there is a favorite, and you're just not willing to tell us.
I really don't think there is. I, I, so I'm high functioning autistic and I have ADHD, both of which tend to feature hyperfocus. So like I will get into one thing and then just deep dive into that thing for 6 months before I get distracted and move on to the next topic. So I wouldn't say that there's any one mythology. I think I've done that with a bunch of them at this point.
Might depend on when we ask you, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Right now, I'm probably back on Celtic and Norse just because writing this series, but a
Yeah,
few years from now, I might be
for me
deep
it's the
diving into
Norse.
Egyptian mythology or whatever.
Yeah, I for me it's the Norse, and then followed very, very closely by the Egyptian stuff
Yeah.
because
Yeah, that was one of the fun things that I did in the first book that I leaned into in this one was combine the Celtic and Norse pantheons, um, by noting that the Dagda is also called Yokadalatar, which literally translates as All Father. I was like, well, what if the Celtic All Father and the Norse All Father were actually the same guy?
right.
So, yeah.
No, that's one of the more fascinating things about the UK's admixture of mythology as well, right?
Well, yeah,
Because
and it's like you can't have Celtic mythology without Norse mythology in the UK because like Scotland was a Norse kingdom. Dublin was Ireland before the Vikings did not have cities.
right,
One of the things that's commonly said in studying Irish history is the Norse brought, well, I guess it's the Danes really, but yeah, the Vikings brought cities, coins, and red hair to Ireland. That's the Viking legacy in Irish culture.
right.
And yeah, the two were intertwined for
I wonder if they brought
hundreds of years, really.
ADD and ADHD as well. I
Maybe.
do think they did because I do feel like if you look at, especially if you look at Thor and Odin and all that, there's a lot of ADHD going on there, and the whole trade or practice of Viking is
Yeah,
is
but
entirely
there's also so many parallels with like pre-Norse Irish mythology. Like, you have the berserkers in the Vikings. In Irish mythology, Cuchulainn went into what they called the warp spasm, which
right.
it was a berserk rage. Like it was the exact same thing,
Yeah.
and it was just for whatever reason the early translators called it a warp spasm, and that became the term. But it's you could just as
Totally,
easily
totally
translate it
not
as
associated with
berserk. Yeah.
No, it's totally not associated with going berserk and going crazy. No.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The main distinguishing feature is that the warp spasm was also like a physical transformation where like you would
Right.
turn into a monster basically, but it was
Yeah.
clearly a
Well, I mean, that
metaphor
was part
for,
of the berserker thing too,
yeah,
was
exactly. It
they
was
were
clearly a metaphor
Wolfgia or
for
whatever.
the same behavior.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you exploring this stuff with us. I really enjoyed reading the book. Blood and Fate was really a good experience. I'm waiting eagerly for the third one. I assume that you're working on it at some
I
point.
worked on it today. There
Cool.
was some work. There are some notes on my whiteboard behind me from the stuff that I was plotting out today.
Well, don't challenge the internet that way, man. They'll be dissecting.
They can't actually read any of. You could read the first if you can read the first three things
Oh,
that really won't tell you anything, and then the rest of it's just sticky notes that don't have anything on them yet. So
but again, challenge the internet. They'll figure out a way.
yeah, if anyone
So
can figure out what the plot of the book is
tell me.
from those notes, please email me and let me know what it is because that would be lovely.
Great. Okay, so the penultimate question here on the Main Free Radio Hour when I'm hosting is what aside from its entertainment value do you hope readers will carry with them long after reading Blood and Fate?
I'd say there's two. One is the continued progression of Quinn as he wrestles with his demons and learns to forgive himself and open back up to the world and you know remember that he is a human and deserves love and friends and all that kind of stuff that the rest of us do. Really, the dude absolutely needs therapy, and I even made a joke about that in the book that he absolutely needs therapy. So
The better
that's one of
one.
them is like don't wrestle with this yourself. If you're struggling with your own personal demons, like people care about you and people do want you to get better and you're not helping anyone by just trying to keep it to yourself. That's one. And then the other is probably just the philosophical exploration of fate and what it means to have free will and to create your own path while still being bound by everything you've done in the past and everything everyone else is doing around you. Like you're not actually, we are free, but that freedom is bounded. And we aren't, no man is an island. We are all threads within, the great tapestry of fate, however you want to phrase that, of existence. And what we do affects everyone else. And that's, I think that's actually a really important philosophical point that a lot of people forget about when they're trying to discuss like it. There was a book that came out, I think it was last year, it might have been earlier this year, but it was by a physicist, I think called Determined, why free will is a myth.
I was thinking about that while you were talking about
Yeah,
it.
and like, one, maybe at a quantum level, we were talking subatomic particles. Yeah, like there's no will happening, and it is, in a sense, it is all determined from one thing. On the other hand, you could also argue chaos theory and quantum uncertainty means that it's not actually determined, that there is elements of chance. It's just that you don't really have control over those. But at the same time, at the macro level, free will, however you want to define it, is certainly within our perception. I always come back to it's a Robert E. Howard Conan quote where he's like, if it's an illusion, then I'm part of the illusion. It's real to me,
Right.
and I live, I laugh, I love, I slay, and I am content. Like maybe it's all a simulation, maybe it's all determined, whatever. But we have to proceed on the assumption that we have choice.
Right.
And in so doing, you have to understand that your choice is not unlimited. Your choice is determined by it's path determinant. Path dependent is the term. Like everything you have done in your life brought you to this moment. Now you get to choose what happens next. But you're not the only one choosing. Everyone around you is also choosing, and that's going to have an impact too. And so that's just something that I hope. I don't think it's going to go down as one of the great philosophical arguments of history, but it might inspire some people to just start thinking about it in their own lives and
Oh, for sure. And
come back
that's
to it.
that's kind of what we go from, when you're reading the myths. Well, why did they do that? That was so contraindicated by everything that's going on around it. Well, because they're trying to fight their fate, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I
In
totally
this
get it. I
case,
think that,
Quinn is trying to understand, well, is fate a thing? And if so, what is it? How does that affect him?
absolutely. And given that his power, even in the beginning of the series, given his power, it's really important that he kind of understand not only his own limitations but his place in the world,
Right.
and how important that is.
Yeah. And yeah, he can withdraw from the world, but that doesn't mean the world's going to withdraw from him.
Yeah, for
He
sure.
can ignore whatever, but they're not going to ignore him.
And that's true for people, right? I think
Yeah.
that's great. That's something great to leave people with is that idea that, hey man, you got to
Oh,
make
and
choices.
I would actually add a third thing is if you actually want to be really good with guns, you got to actually train.
Or good at anything. If you want to
Yeah,
be really good
good
at
at any.
anything.
What's another one of my favorite philosophical quotes comes from Adventure Time. Jake the dog. Sucking at something is the first step to being sort of good at something.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right. So, last question. What conventions can your fans hope to catch up with you at? And what other work do you have in the pipeline?
The two that I go to every year are LibertyCon, which this year was a couple weeks ago, so sorry if you missed me there. And DragonCon. I don't know if I'll be there the whole time this year. I've got a 1-year-old and don't want to leave my wife alone with him for too long, or because I don't really want to get divorced. But we're debating whether she's going to come and we're going to bring the kid and try and work around that or what. So we'll figure that out. But I will be there. I will be doing a signing. And I think we're gonna do something with like the Feral for Fantasy group
Yeah, cool.
that I'll be involved in for that. And then I'm next January or February, there's a local one here in Detroit that I'm gonna try and do. That I'm blanking on. Give me 1 second. Um, hmm.
I can't remember the name of it either. I think
I'm blanking on the name of the
it's the one
convention.
that's
It's
up.
literally right around the corner from my house. So Confusion.
Yeah, Confusion. Right.
Confusion in January of next year, January 23rd to 26th. I'm gonna try and see if I can participate in that because it's a mile from my house, so that's always fun.
Always good. Yeah. Very cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, Aaron. This has been a good time, and I hope you enjoyed your time on the show. And I can't wait to see your next book, which hopefully will be coming in next year sometime.
Yeah, hopefully it's not as delayed as this one was. There were some life events that occurred in the writing of this one that slowed me down a bit.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Griff.
And now, as promised, one jump ahead. John Moore is a nanotech-enhanced soldier of fortune. Lobo is an AI, a living weapons and intelligence platform of enormous destructive potential. Two very dangerous wolves in a galaxy of deadly corporate and paramilitary predators. But Moore has grown weary of the killing, and just once he'd like to finish the job without leaving a trail of blood behind him. Not going to happen. Not on a pristine planet called Macon, where two gigantic corporations vie for control of the local jump gate and access to the riches of an undeveloped world. Dealing with a kidnapping and extortion scheme is only the beginning for Moore and Lobo as they work to stay one jump ahead.
The Frontier Coalition hired a new mercenary company, the Shosin Advanced Weapons Corporation, to deal with the situation. The SAW, my last employer, I'd left the SAW about 12 years ago, but the decade I'd spent with them would always be strong in my memory. The SAW was a good group, in my opinion the best, of course, or I wouldn't have joined it. But my time with it was, by the nature of the jobs they took, full of actions I'll never be able to forget. When I could separate the people from the violence, I thought fondly of them, good folks all, especially our captain, Tristan Earle, one of the few officers I've ever trusted, and both the craziest and the canniest leader I've ever followed. I could never maintain that separation for long, though. The memories of the battles that then roared into my brain dragged with them an almost overpowering self-loathing. as I all too vividly relived missions that I knew were necessary, that I would perform again in the same circumstances, but that I would never be able to forgive myself for taking. I realized Lobo was still speaking. "Please repeat that last bit, Lobo," I said. "The part right after you said the FC contracted with the SAW." "The minimal multitasking ability you humans possess," Lobo said, "always leaves me amazed that you are the owners and I am the owned. The SAW provided its own equipment, but its contract does not extend to Mackin. The Coalition wanted me available for security on Mackin, so they paid SAW technicians to clean me and repair me as much as possible with no significant monetary investment, then dropped me in that square in Glenn's garden. Because there was no active conflict on the planet, the Coalition was unwilling to invest the rather sizable sum it would have cost to replace my central weapons control complex. The SAW was not particularly interested in me as long as I was on a planet that was not on their contract. Since that time, a new generation of PCAVs has appeared, so fully repairing me has never been a priority for anyone." "It never is," I said. "I do not understand. Repair of veterans past their prime is never a government's top priority, never will be," I said. "No obvious return on investment to the people with the money." I shook my head to clear away unwanted memories and focus on the topic at hand. "So, were your systems frozen as of the cleanup?" "Of course not," Lobo said. "I may not be current generation, but I am also not some dumb manufacturing assembly ship or big cargo hauler. I was built to maintain myself to the greatest degree possible. Even on Mackin, Coalition systems upgrades of all sorts regularly arrived on government shuttles. I pulled my upgrades from each set as it hit the planetary Coalition net and applied them myself. I have also worked to the limits of my hardwired adaptive programming constraints to stay in touch with all relevant planetary intelligence sources, such as the satellite we used, and to apply viral and genetic programming techniques where permitted to extend and improve my abilities. I am as capable as possible within the limitations I am unable to remove." "I apologize for the question," I said, meaning it. "I wish I knew more people or machines who could say the same about improving themselves as Lobo. I certainly couldn't. Too many of my limitations came from my own weaknesses I rarely found the time to address." A transmission from the station interrupted us. We were third in line on this side and should be able to make the jump in about an hour. Lobo headed us for the position the station designated. I thought about Frank's mistake and how easy it was to assume the wrong thing, and then paid dearly. It was likely that either Osterlad or any other dealer I approached to supply Lobo's missing parts would keep the transaction simple, but why take chances? "You mentioned embedded staff transmitters," I said. "Were those supplied by the contractor, or do you have a local supply?" "Both," Lobo said. "I was built to be able to support a full squad on long-haul missions, so I am completely provisioned. I have even updated the software in my staff transmitters to make them more unpredictable in transmission time and frequency, with delays between bursts ranging randomly from a second to 3 minutes. Any group that doesn't know to look for them will not spot them." "Show me," I said. A wall segment about 5 meters behind me opened. A drawer protruded. A sheet of what appeared to be clear plastic sat in the drawer next to a hypo and a bottle of clear solution. Wires led from the rear edge of the plastic back into Lobo. "The sheet is woven from interconnected transmitters," Lobo said. "Installation is simple. punch the sheet with the hypo, suck up the segment under the needle, add solution, and inject it. "How far can you track with it?" I asked. "The bursts are short but powerful, though obviously range varies with the frequency and with the number and type of intervening obstacles. Anyone out to block all transmissions can, of course, do so, but under normal conflict conditions, both sides need transmissions too much for anyone to be able to afford to stop them all. We typically see in combat transmission ranges of anywhere from a few to a couple hundred kilometers." "What are the side effects on users?" I said. "None beyond occasional minor tissue damage from the strongest of the transmissions, and even that is extremely rare. The bursts are typically neither long nor powerful enough to hurt humans. As long as you do not use it full time, even fairly long missions should not cause any serious damage we could not repair." I took the needle out of the drawer. "I don't expect to see any action we can't handle through normal communications, but I might as well use all the tools at my disposal." I followed Lobo's instructions and injected myself. "How long until it transmits and you can track me?" "No delay," Lobo said. "Troops typically install these before entering combat zones, so the transmitters emit verification signals every 15 seconds for the first 2 minutes. I am reading you now." "If we're ever separated without prior notice from me," I said, "track me. If I don't make contact at a scheduled time, attempt to contact me. If I don't respond, retrieve me." "Though I can find you," Lobo said, "I obviously have no options for close quarters retrieval." "Do what you can," I said. "If you can't retrieve me, and if I stay incommunicado for more than 5 days, destroy whatever is holding me." If the situation came to that, someone might as well pay. "Understood," Lobo said. "We are now first in line on this side to jump. When the ship from the other side is safely over, gate control will send us." I watched as another Kelco freight hauler began to slide gently through the aperture, and then I strapped into the pilot's couch. Though jumping never caused any physical sensations, I still loved the moment when the current starscape vanished as the aperture filled my vision with utter darkness, and I always marveled at my first look at another part of the universe, even if it was a view I'd seen before. Every jump bristled with the possibility of the new, and with the momentary irrational fear-thrill combination that comes with the knowledge that what you're about to do is not right, that people cannot move across tens or even hundreds of light years instantaneously. The ship from the other side was completely through and out of our way. Lobo took us up to the aperture, its surface of purest black growing and expanding until it filled the viewport, until it was all there was in front of me, until in the final seconds before we entered the gate, everything I could see of our future was darkness.
This has been the Bane Free Radio Hour. Thanks for joining us at the heart of science fiction. Join us next week as we bring you something a little different. We're talking to a select group of podcasters and internet personalities about what brought them to engage with online communities with their content and fandom. Our panel includes the fine folks from Bullshido and Blasters and Blades, as well as Jill Barrett, whose advice on dealing with some of the platforms has been useful to a great many people, including the Bane Free Radio Hour. Later, we continue with part 24 of One Jump Ahead by Mark Van Name. Score by Ruth Judkowitz.